Okay, thank you so much, and thank you to Jim and everyone at the crowd for the invitation to take part in this important debate. For me, there are three crucial arguments as to why, for environmental reasons, Britain is better off in Europe. And firstly, it's to do with the cross-border nature of tackling environmental degradation. Environmental problems do not queue politely at borders waiting for their passports to be checked. They are, by their very nature, cross-border, and therefore they need cross-border solutions. And for that reason alone, it seems to me, that if the EU didn't exist, then we would need to create it. Take air pollution as an example. A crisis in this country, 40,000 premature deaths associated with it. And yet up to 50% of the concentrations of fine particulate matter, the main cause of death from air pollution, are coming from emissions from other European countries. In other words, this is a problem we cannot solve on our own. And that's why the EU Clean Air Policy Package is incredibly important, because it makes sure that all nations across the EU are cleaning up their act, and ministers know that the threat of legal action looms if they don't reduce this level of killer pollution in our towns and cities. Similarly, it's European laws which have forced the sewage out of Britain's bathing waters and the acid rain out of Britain's atmosphere. They're getting rid of the most dangerous chemicals in our environment and the carbon pollution of our motor vehicles. Essentially, for challenges that span national boundaries, our EU membership helps us avoid duplication, increase coordination, and pool limited resources. Now, those cross-border concerns also underpin legislation like the Habitats and the Birds Directives. And let's be really clear that that legislation is far stronger than our own homegrown regulation, like the sites of special scientific interest or areas of outstanding national beauty. And they work. Take this bit of analysis, for example, that shows that the most consistent single factor in a species' fate when it comes to the Birds Directive is whether or not it's protected by that directive. So some of the successes have been astonishing. Red kite numbers are up over 2,000%, cranes are up 1,600%. Now, those two directives represent the toughest protection there is for the natural world in Britain. And if we were to leave the EU, I would contend that those protections would go with us. Because if anyone genuinely thinks that the UK government is just as likely to enact legislation in this area on its own, I would suggest that you have not been paying attention. We currently have a Prime Minister who talks of getting rid of the so-called green crap, who's made it his mission to have a bonfire of regulation. A Chancellor who has said that the EU nature laws place, and I quote, ridiculous costs on British firms. A government that has instructed its own MEPs to vote against laws to improve inspections on vehicle real-world emissions. And we have the glorious prospect, if Cameron is replaced by Boris, of a new Prime Minister who apparently doesn't even believe that climate change is caused by human activity. I rest my case. However, I have two more quick things to say. My second reason is that I want UK politicians to have a positive influence over the EU rules that will continue to affect us regardless of whether or not we are a member of the EU. Leave campaigners don't seem to have a very clear picture of what Britain would look like outside the EU. If you're Michael Gove, apparently you think it looks like Albania. But plenty of others are saying that they think our relationship will be similar to that of Norway or Switzerland. In other words, having access to the single market, but in return, having to adopt the vast majority of the EU's environmental regulation and having absolutely no say on the formulation of that regulation at all. I want Britain to be at the EU negotiating table where environmental legislation is being discussed, because I think we can influence it in positive ways. Take the recent climate change talks in Paris. It was the UK that helped lead efforts within the EU, first of all, to make sure that we had an ambitious position. And then after that, it was the EU then that was able to ensure that other countries took an ambitious position as well. So, far from diminishing us, I think the EU multiplies British influence, ideas and values. Crucially, it also offers a vital level playing field of minimum environmental regulation across Europe to prevent a so-called race to the bottom where member states seek to gain competitive advantage by destroying the natural environment. I only have a few seconds left, but my third and final reason is this: that climate change is the biggest threat that we face, and we need all of the best minds and the best technology as fast as possible to tackle that climate catastrophe. And by working inside the European Union, we have a much better chance of being able to move faster, more ambitiously, for all of the reasons that David Baldock explained earlier on when he was talking about the fact that countries feel more comfortable working together. So I want to leave you with that thought, that if we are serious about getting off the collision course we're currently on with catastrophic climate change, we have a much better chance of doing it by working with our colleagues inside the European Union.